Good afternoon, dear students, dear alumni and guests. My name is Professor Katarzyna Rębielak, and on behalf of Warsaw University of Technology Business School, I would like to welcome you very warmly to today's inspirational lecture. I want to welcome students and alumni of our university, Warsaw University of Technology and our business school, and also all the guests of our partners. The University of Salford in Manchester, Polimi Graduate School of Management, Politecnico di Milano, Goa Institute of Management from India, Baltic Management Institute in Vilnius and Brussels, HEC in Paris, the Management Center in Innsbruck, and Zicklin School of Business, Baruch College, New York City University. Today, the inspirational lecture will be delivered by Mr. Michał Kaźmierski, who is representing Warsaw University of Technology Business School and our partner Values. Mr. Kaźmierski is a lecturer and coach at the Academy of Leadership Psychology at our school, and he will share insights on navigating success in the dynamic business world. I also want to take this opportunity to invite you to the next inspirational lecture, which will take place online on 22nd of February and will be delivered by Dr. Marie Griffith and Dr. Maria Kuta from Salford Business School, the University of Salford in Manchester in the UK, and will be entitled Rochdale SME Leaders Developing a Productivity Mindset Mentoring Scheme. So that is, in short, all from me today. I want to wish you a great time with Mr. Kaźmierski, and after the lecture, you will be invited to ask questions on the chat. So I think it's a good time now for a start. So enjoy the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you for presentation and invitation. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on your time zone. I'm very glad to be here with you and very grateful for Warsaw University of Technology Business School for inviting me. Well, my goal today is to inspire you based on the work of Jim Collins, who studied organizations that were able to retain success over time or who were able to make a transition from good to great. Perhaps Jim Collins is a known name to you, the author of many books, those two, Built to Last and Good to Great, perhaps being the most famous. And you know, with 4 million ish books of Good to Great sold, perhaps he really made his mark and for some time shaped the thinking of business leaders and business thinkers in the world. That said, the books were published quite a while ago. Good to Great was published on October 16, 2001, so it's almost 24 years ago. So, you know, the question is valid. Are the rules, the classic rules discovered or formulated by Jim Collins based on his studies, are still valid in today's world? And in the remaining of my lecture, I would like to somehow explore with you to what extent the rules are nowadays also valid. And well, let's see. So I'd like to start with a brief overview of the research, mainly based on Good to Great, because I think this book consists the most consistent set of rules that are very, very well known, I believe. So Good to Great was a project to answer the question why some companies that were good companies for many years, for 15 years, they were performing at or slightly below the market, but they were good companies. suddenly made a transformation into, as Collins called them, great companies. And in his terminology, great company was the company that was able to deliver compound annual total return to investors of at least 3 times the general market over 15 years. So quite significantly outperforming the market. Of course, we are talking only about one aspect of greatness, but it's important to notice that we are talking only about US companies that were noted on US stock exchange. But for these companies, the data were available in most consistent form. So that allowed Collins to really study them. Of course, that's important limitation that was brought many times. But on the other hand, it allowed him to really study and make comparisons. So through the quite rigorous process, he selected a set of companies that he wanted to, that fulfilled all the criteria. So the companies that really made the sustained transition from good to great companies. And he identified in the end 11 of such companies, and you can see them here. But he was interested not only in what was common between those companies, he was also interested in answering the question, what was common for these companies, but what distinguished them from so-called direct comparison companies. So the companies that were also at the time great, that were, really performing well on the market, were similar in many aspects, were similar in terms of size, were similar in terms of resources, were similar in terms of market position. So they were performing well. They had great leaders on top. They were good names at the time. But they were not able to demonstrate this transition from good to great. So having those 2 sets of companies, Collins initiated the research project. And with all the criticisms we may have vis-a-vis his work, in my opinion, that was one of the best researched set in business history. He really did an effort to make the research solid, of course, as much as possible. And at the end, he somehow realized that there is something these companies have in common. And what distinguished these companies from others was, of course, this pattern of build-up and breakthrough. And this part of the build-up and breakthrough could be broken down into 3 stages. You see them: discipline people, discipline thought, and discipline action. And with each stage, there are 2 key concepts. So for disciplined people, we have level 5 leadership, first who then what. For disciplined thought, we have confront brutal facts and so-called hedgehog concept. For discipline action, we have culture of discipline and technology accelerators. And that whole thing was somehow linked through the effect Collins called a flywheel. So all these actions were incrementally building up momentum that was pushing company further and further. And as Collins would like to say, make it even unstoppable. Of course, in reality, it was not that beautiful that all companies, in fact, were unstoppable. But we will see in a moment how they really perform now. So that was the first model, with those level 5 leadership, first who then what, confront the brutal facts, hedgehog concept, culture of discipline, and technology accelerators, being the principles that, in Collins' view, were distinguished the company. And of course, they were based in a broader philosophy of discipline. discipline, people, thought, and action. A bit later, in a book called BE20, that was a re-edition of the book Beyond Entrepreneurship, which Collins wrote together with Bill Lazier, he somehow combined all insights from his work, from all the research, all his books, to create a map on how to build a great company. And here you see how he is progressing through all stages of disciplined people, disciplined thought, disciplined action, and finally building to last a great company. And in each stage, we can see principles taken from the model from the previous slide, but also there are additional principles that he discovered while researching and writing his others' books. So we don't have time today to go in details through each and every of these principles. Nevertheless, the question is still valid. How these principles hold in today's world? So before I answer this question, let me dig a bit into what is going on with the companies from original Collins 11 now. And you can see here that out of 11, Circuit City stores went bankrupt, Gillette Company was somehow merged or sold to another company. Fannie Mae, in an aftermath of financial crisis, somehow got the government umbrella. But other companies survived. Some of them are doing very well. For example, Nucor. Some of them are a bit struggling. But overall, they are still alive. And compared to comparison 11, where only 2 companies survived, one may say, oh yeah, there is something in these rules. So that's one thing of looking at Collins' discoveries. Nevertheless, there are voices that, because of a time that has already passed since the original publication, as you see in the example here, it's time to retire good to great from the leadership canon. And there are criticisms, valid criticisms regarding methodology, regarding not fitting into current world, and they are absolutely valid. I don't deny them. I'm also very, very aware that doing a research in a corporate world is not like doing the research in particles physics. We don't have the luxury of creating and repeating experiments, and we don't have the luxury of creating and maintaining experimental conditions. So this is a very difficult area to study. And somehow I think, that Collins' work and other work is similar. Yeah, we may of course argue, but nevertheless, it's very hard to get golden rules of driving business. And most likely these rules does not exist, because if they would exist, we would have already known them and apply them in our work. So of course, when we look at when Good to Great, for example, and Built to Last even earlier was published, the times were different. Here I plotted the years where companies from Good to Great were established. So you see, very often they are over 100 years old. And of course, during the time where Collins did a research for Good to Great, companies that are now the most valued company, the most renowned companies such as Google, Tesla, Facebook, were non even existing. Microsoft Apple and Amazon, well, yes, they were existing within the time frame of the study, but they were not on the present long enough to be included into his research. So you see that the picture has changed. If we looked at Fortune 500 at the time of publication and even at the time of research, that would be totally different. We wouldn't see Teslas, Microsofts, Googles, or Alphabets. We were not at that time facing the revolution that came very soon. Look at this chart that is showing the number of cell phones in 1995 until 2005. Of course, now the number is even bigger. So yes, indeed, Collins' work was reflecting the reality that is long time gone. First, it's interesting fact I discovered while preparing for this research. Motorola Dyna TAC 8000X was launched in 1983 and allowed 30 minutes talk time over 10 hours to charge. That's really not what we have. And the world now, of course, and the world changed immensely. If we look at the share of the information flowing through telecommunication network, namely through internet versus total information telecommunicated, it was only 1% in 1993. Now it's 97%, and we are not surprised. We also become more global, connected, digital, and also remote in a paradoxical way. It's worth mentioning that a lot of companies that were studied by Jim Collins operated and still operate, like, for example, Nucor, mostly in the US or exclusively in the US. So definitely, times were different. And we were thinking about organizations in different ways. So some of the arguments saying that we should retire Good to Great or other Jim Collins findings because of their irrelevance, yes, they might be irrelevant in today's world where we have in the age of information and information overload, and also the possibility that I'm illustrating here. Those illustrations are created with help of DALL-E, so graphic version of GTP, chat GTP. That's really, easy, fast way of getting something. Not perfect, I would say, far from perfect, but on the other hand, impressive, given the fact that I wanted chat GTP just to illustrate the difference between the 90s and 2000s. That was what I asked ChatGPT, and he brought me those pictures of vast desert and only islands of knowledge, like libraries, and we had to go to these islands of knowledge. And now we are in the information overload environment. And also, the way we think of organizations due to all the changes in the environment is also evolving. So perhaps what was describing organization that was still more, closer to classical organization with manufacturing, were those set of descriptors, boundary of organization, authority, roles, tasks. Everything is still valid, but today's organization operate in network environment. We are much more network, and organizations also operate as networks or in the network. Influence versus authority. Today, I also brought power because those elements somehow change the location. It's not that CEO of the organization has absolute power and absolute influence. In the age of influencers, the companies are very much learning, sometimes very painfully, how the new world, how spread of information can bring them troubles, how it's very difficult now to control all those aspects. And also identity. This is what is the world right now, when it's not only about task, it's only about what we, even more than before, what as an organization we are, who we are as an organization, what do we stand for. It's much more important for our employees, for our customers, who very often go beyond product and look at these aspects while making their decisions. So the world today is much different from the world of organization as machine and people being cogs in the machines. Now it's more organization as a system. And of course, the risk is that as people were sometimes described as cogs in the machines, they may become data in the system. So there are some positive and of course risks associated with every stage of development, which undoubtedly is more complex. Again, you see what is the vision of ChatGPT when asked, tell me the difference between business environment in 90s and business environment into 20s. This is what ChatGPT is thinking. But complexity, the world is becoming more complex. One may argue it was always complex, it was always volatile, uncertain. But now what we face is the speed of change and really certain fundamental shifts are making business more difficult to manage, more difficult to run. Of course, I'm talking still in view of principles of Jim Collins that were derived in this old world. While now in complex domain, we know that if we are entering into the complex domain, we may expect no direct relation between cause and effects. We only know what the right solution is if we act. Until we act, we don't know what the right solution is. So in this environment, best and good practices will not work, and best and good practices were a staple of corporate somehow practice in the past, Six Sigma and so on. Now, of course, everything is still valid, but we do not need to look any further than to the beginning of 2020 and COVID-19. That is very useful example to see how we enter complexity, how we enter unknown, how we enter the situation where expertise knowledge that is very useful where we are in the complicated domain, where expertise knowledge can help us solve issues, suddenly become not so much valid. And in this environment, I would argue, Collins' principle of first who then what is even more important, because we need to very carefully organize our teams. The teams from the past may not be the teams which will bring success for the company in the future. And here, the distinction that Collins made in Good to Great between level 5 leader and level 4 leader, which he calls a genius with 1,000 helpers. And the distinction between putting first who over first what and then who, in my view, becomes very important right now. We need to think about creating our teams in a way that will help us navigate complexity. And that means limits of expertise. While I look into my experience from my work, from my discussions with leaders from Academy of Leadership Psychology, still many companies, as a default and almost on autopilot, are seeking the expertise. While now it's really time to reflect on first who then what, whom we are bringing to proverbial bus, as Jim Collins explained it, and who will live outside the bus. Moreover, even from our all personal view, first who. So answering question, what kind of people do we want to work with? What kind of people do we want to spend time with? And what kind of people do we want to be around? Because some say that we become as people with whom we are connected. So these are important questions. And also, people decisions, who we hire, who we promote, and who we fire, will always be the most watched by the whole organizations, and they create what we want to achieve, a culture. So in this respect, reflection of Colin's point of bringing right people to the bus and getting not right people out of the bus, in my view, is not only still valid, but even more important as the times are shifted. And we, and especially leaders of the organizations, need to think forward about the future and about preparing this organization and staffing them with people who will be able to navigate more and more complex world of the future. Then, culture of discipline. That's something that resonated with me very much. And I think in today's world, when we are navigating out of seeing organization as command and control, authority, hierarchy, into organizations that are flatter, that are where we want to empower people, where we want to embrace diversity, those elements will not work until we have appropriate structure of the organization and appropriate organizational mindset. So if we want to embrace diversity, we need to create environment for diversity to flourish. We need to empower the people to really think, because very often still in the organizational world, what is exposed on the walls is not really lived in a daily life. And I believe a culture of discipline as a concept from good to great, of having disciplined people, disciplined thought, and disciplined action that brings no need for hierarchy, bureaucracy, and excessive controls, is of a special importance in the world when we want flatter, more empowered, and innovative organizations. Then Hedgehog concept. Hedgehog concept is about creating the intersection of those three elements. What are we deeply passionate about? What we really like to do? What we really are committed to devote our life to? What can we be the best in the world? It's important distinction, because we may want to do something, but we may not necessarily be able to be the best. And then, of course, finally, what is driving our economic engine? And looking at the Hedgehog concept, it is important to realize that if we start with economic engine, it's not necessarily the best way. And Jim Collins is warning us, especially young people, from starting here. Start from what are you passionate about, then what can you best in the world, and then about your economic engine. And of course, Hedgehog concept apply to big organization, big corporation, but I must say in my work as a leader, I was applying it to my own teams, to our own work. Because even if we work in the domain of bigger institution, bigger corporation, we still have a set of practices, we have a set of tools, and we may think about our specific situations, what will work for us, what will work for our team. And especially in complex world, when we need to act in order to realize what is the right solution, because we cannot very often find the right solution just by thinking and trying to project in the future, this Hedgehog concept is of great importance. And finally, Jim Collins underscored very much the so-called the genius of end. So he discovered that the companies who did very well in his research, they were able to do both paradoxically, sometimes very paradoxically opposite things. So they were able to do something and something instead of not doing this. Like in the example you see here, centralizing and decentralizing. One of the things I see leaders, especially leaders with a bit less experience, are struggling, and also large organizations, is dual dichotomic thinking, either or. And this is creating sometimes very serious issues because we are not able to solve those issues in that way. Certain issues that are called by, that are called by the author of the book, Barry Johnson, they are called polarities. And we cannot see polarities as issues to solve. We need to manage them. Looking at the example here, if we only choose between centralizing and decentralizing, and we have positive aspects of both centralizing and decentralizing on top and negative aspects on the bottom of the graph, we will realize that if we go for one solution, if we, after a period of centralizing, fall into mode of decentralizing, unfortunately, we will end up in both of worst worlds, not in both of best worlds. And I encourage you to reach to Barry Johnson work because it's very eye-opening and enlightening. And also Jim Collins somehow realized it through his research sometimes ago. So, well, should we retire or not? Of course, one way of looking at those principles is to retire them, deny them, invalidate them. But another way of looking at it, more in a spirit of Jim Collins, would be to reflect on them, adapt them, and enrich them in order to fit to current reality. I have chosen a few to show that, in my view, these are still valid. Because despite the fact that we aspirationally would like to see organizations as different from those in the 90s, unfortunately, very rarely we still see examples of level 5 leadership, or not as enough as we would like to see. So leaders who really put success of the organization versus personal glory, who really take accountability for results versus, for example, blaming and excuses, who really have humility and self-awareness versus ego and arrogance, who really empower and focus on developing others versus micromanagement and control, and who really have long-term orientation and sustainability versus only looking at short-term gains, and who are really able to stand up because they know that they are leading by examples and they don't need to hide behind procedures, stiff directives, and creating double standards. Leading by example is also opening up to not knowing, is opening up to learning, even from those who are below us. And in my work as a consultant, I very often see management teams who are very keen to do development program for other employees, but they abstain from taking part in it. So I believe there is still a lot of room. And if we only reflect on the rules and we see what works for us, what can we take from these rules, in my view, we will only can get better, because Collins is encouraging us to reflect, is encouraging us to take disciplined approach, and is encouraging us to execute. And I believe these are timeless foundations of success that will always be valid in every time. Thank you very much. Okay, we still have a couple of minutes left. So if there are any questions, unfortunately, I can't see you. So the only way of communicating is through chat. So if there are any questions or any feedback, comments, please put them in the chat. Okay, I see no questions, no need to comment. So once again, I encourage you to reflect on the rules, on Jim Collins' work, because it may be quite inspirational journey, especially in the world that we very often need to understand from scratch. Thank you very much once again.